Do you enjoy Dungeons & Dragons, video games, role-playing games, comic books, science fiction, fantasy, and movies? Check out Point of Insanity Network, where we bring you the Geekery in General podcast, where we will discuss a variety of topics of geek interest. We also offer Gamer's Gambit, a monthly look at current events and trends in the video game industry. If martial arts are your thing, check out The Casual Martial Artist, where we discuss topics of interest to the martial artist as well as people who just enjoy martial arts. Find us at poigamestudio.podbean.com.
Alright guys, welcome back to Queens of the Damned, a horror podcast. This week we chose to do another spotlight episode on a horror icon. Needless to say, I think Rachel was a little excited about this one. We did choose Vincent Price for this episode, so we start out with a little biography by Rachel, just kind of a description of his life, all the great things that he did, and all of his interests. And then Nikki and I talk about two of probably the movies that he's most famous for. Nikki starts with House on Haunted Hill, and I finish the episode with The House of Usher. Hope you guys enjoy the episode, and happy listening.
So, we are talking about Vincent Price this week. So excited. Oh my god, you guys. And I just want to apologize in advance. Obviously, I have a cold. I've had a cold for like 2 weeks, so if I cough, listeners, I'm sorry. If you hear a little crinkling, I'm sorry. It's a cough drop. I'm going to try not to do it, though. Okay, so Vincent Price was born May 27th, 1911 in St. Louis. He was born into a pretty wealthy family. His grandfather invented baking powder, so they had some money. So he graduates from high school, and he goes to Yale University. And he graduates with a major in art history. So after he leaves Yale, Vincent teaches for a year and then goes to I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, but it's the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, which is an extremely prestigious art school. And he's pursuing a master's in fine art and art history, but finds himself drawn to the theater. As people always do in these stories, right? So he quits school and he decides to become a professional actor. So he begins his stage career in 1934, so he's 23, performing at Orson Welles' Mercury Theatre in the West End of London. And he performs in London for 3 years, and then he moves back to the US and decides to have a go at Hollywood. So he makes his film debut in 1938 in this movie called Service Deluxe, which I have seen. It's a romantic comedy, and he's the romantic lead.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, which is so funny. It's so funny to see him, especially early. I mean, throughout his career, he does do different kinds of movies beyond horror, but it's funny to watch him in other kinds of movies, I guess, because all you associate him with is horror. But he's actually like a really good actor outside of his cheesy horror movies. So he makes a living as a character actor for a while, and then he has his breakout role in this movie called Laura, which comes out in 1944. It's a film noir. It's considered one of the greatest film noirs of all time. It's an excellent movie. If people haven't seen it, I don't know if it's streaming anywhere, but it's amazing. And he plays kind of, again, the He's like the playboy fiance of Laura, who's the woman who was murdered in the movie. He realizes in the 1950s that he has a talent for horror movies, right? And the way that he speaks, I mean, he has that like beautiful speaking voice, and the way that he speaks really serves horror movies well. So his first big horror role is in The Invisible Man Returns, which is for Universal. He took over for Claude Rains as the Invisible Man. It's one of the many Invisible Man sequels. He's actually only physically in the movie for 1 minute, and then he spends the rest of the movie as a disembodied voice because, of course, he's, the Invisible Man. So he starts regularly appearing in horror films, including House of Wax, The Fly, and then 2 William Castle horror movies, House on Haunted Hill, which I think we're going to hear about later, and then The Tingler, which I previously talked about. Yeah. So he's kind of makes his living doing these low-budget movies for about a decade. And then in the 1960s, he becomes this box office sensation when he teams with Roger Corman, who is a very legendary low-budget horror director. He did, like, the original Little Shop of Horrors, that kind of stuff. And they team up on this series of semi-low-budget Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, beginning with The House of Usher. And he does, like, almost all of Poe's short stories. He does a movie of The Raven, which is, like, really bad. But this kind of is what makes him, like, this household name, right? And this A-list star. But he doesn't want to do just horror. In this time, he stars in the movie version of The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. And in 1968, he does a Broadway musical called Darling of the Day, which I actually have the album if anyone wants to listen to it. But it's not very good. And it's this like legendary flop. It only played for like 20 performances or something before it closed. And he continues his career in horror movies until the 1970s. He makes another one of his really famous movies called The Abominable Dr. Phibes. So about 1975, horror really begins to slump at the box office. So, and of course at this point, even though he has done these varied roles, obviously when you think of Vincent Price, you think of horror, right? So he's kind of been typecast in these roles. So he decides to shift into radio and voiceover work. He releases a series of recordings of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories and poems, which are really great. Some of them also star Basil Rathbone, who's also a really great actor. Obviously, he does Thriller. He does the narration in Thriller. And he continues to guest star on TV and star in the theater. He adapts Oscar Wilde's life into a one-man show called Diversions and Delights, which he ends up touring the world with. And his family actually considers this his greatest performance. And he also begins hosting these one-off TV specials. So, for example, there's one you can find on YouTube that's a lot of fun. It's called America Screams. And he basically goes to all these different amusement parks and rides roller coasters and then explains the history of these, like, old wooden roller coasters. And, like, why roller coasters scare us and, like, all kind of stuff. It's really fun. It's really fun. So in 1982, he's given a short poem called Vincent, which of course we know was written by Tim Burton. And Vincent Price loves it so much that he gets in contact with Disney, who Tim Burton was working for them at the time, and he tells them, I'll narrate this.
Oh my god.
So, yeah. So Disney gives Tim Burton like $50,000 to make this little short film, this little short stop-motion animated film called Vincent, narrated by Vincent Price. And Vincent Price was Tim Burton's idol growing up, right? And basically everything that Vincent Price ever did inspired Tim Burton's entire career, right? And this actually leads to a lifelong friendship between Tim Burton and Vincent Price. And Vincent Price called Vincent the most gratifying thing that had ever happened. It was immortality, better than being a star on Hollywood Boulevard. And it's because he felt like his work had an influence on somebody else. And now his legacy would carry on, right? He wasn't just like shouting into the void, right? He inspired someone who now is going to continue to inspire other people. So he really loved that. In 1986, he completed one of his final and favorite roles, which was the voice of Professor Ratigan in Disney's The Great Mouse Detective, which I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Great Mouse Detective.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I haven't.
Okay, you should watch it, Miranda. It's really good. So Professor Ratigan, so it's basically Sherlock Holmes but with mice. And Professor Ratigan is like Professor Moriarty. He's the bad guy. So from 1981 to 1989, he hosted PBS Mystery. So he would, I don't know if you guys ever watched PBS Mystery growing up.
No.
So I did, but obviously it was after Vincent Price's time. It was, I was only 3 when he quit hosting it. But basically what it was like an hour and a half long, like standalone, either like a standalone TV movie or like a series, usually from the BBC, that would come over to PBS. And the host would kind of introduce it at the beginning and then at the end do like a closing spooky narration, right? And they were like in a library sitting by the fire in like a smoking jacket, Anyway, so his final film was Edward Scissorhands. That was filmed in 1990. And his role actually in Edward Scissorhands was cut short because he was ill. He suffered from emphysema. He was a lifelong smoker and Parkinson's disease. And he died of lung cancer on October 25th, 1993 at the age of 82. And his ashes were scattered in Malibu. There is one final Vincent Price film, and that is Conversations with Vincent, which Tim Burton was working on at the time of Vincent Price's death. It was basically him and Vincent Price sitting down and talking about his life and career. Tim Burton has never released it and has said that he probably won't because he was so devastated when he died. He said it's just too personal. It's too personal for him to release, though I personally would love to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to being an actor, Vincent Price had a lot of interests. He had a lot of talents. So he was a gourmet chef who I have made several of his recipes, and they're very, very, very good. He released 3 cookbooks in his lifetime. A Treasury of Great Recipes, Cooking Price-Wise with Vincent Price, and Mary and Vincent Price's Come Into the Kitchen cookbook, which is great. That was originally like a 5-volume set that I have in like the 50th anniversary, like 75-pound book. But it's really, really, really good food. He hosted a cooking show on ITV in Great Britain for 2 years called Cooking Price-Wise. And he promoted his cookbooks on many talk shows, most famously by poaching a fish in a dishwasher on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which you could also find on YouTube and is hysterical. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, but I guess it works. I've never tried that.
Ew.
So, what?
How was it? Like, did they eat it?
Yeah, I guess it was good.
Okay.
I've never tried it.
There's a show on TV right now that's like, it's some sort of hacking show, and they did that on there.
Yeah, well, they
cooked a fish in a dishwasher, and it worked.
They ripped it off from Vincent Price.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yep, that's kind of his most famous appearance. Like, there's a lot of really good ones, and like, he's a funny, obviously very smart person, so like, he's really quick-witted. But yeah, him poaching the fish in the dishwasher is kind of the most famous. So obviously, because he was an art history major in college, he was also an avid art collector and art historian. In 1957, Vincent and his wife Mary donated 90 pieces from their personal collection to the East Los Angeles Community College and helped establish the Vincent Price Art Museum. So he was inspired to do this after seeing how many lower income community college students had never actually experienced art firsthand. You know, there were people there who were majoring in art, but could not afford to go to the art museum or did not have a way to get to the art museum to see the artwork that they were studying. So ultimately, he and his wife donated over 2,000 pieces with a value of over $5 million. His full art collection at the time of his death, he had over 5,000 pieces of art. He also worked with Sears Roebuck from 1962 to 1971 to offer the Vincent Price collection of fine art. So customers were able to go into the Sears catalog and order from a selection of 50,000 fine art prints. And he, again, saw this as a way to provide the public with access to art that they might not be able to see otherwise. He strongly believed that art was universal and should not be a privilege to the wealthy or to only people who lived in big cities. I mean, if you lived in the middle of Iowa, how were you going to get to an art museum, right? Mm-hmm. I guess you could go to Chicago, but what a pain, right? And of course, this is obviously pre-internet. And so for him, this was a way to make sure that people could have nice art in their home and be able to see and appreciate art. So he was married 3 times first to Edith Barrett from 1938 to 1948, then to Mary Grant from 1949 to 1973, and finally to Coral Brown from 1974 to her death in 1991. He has 2 children who are still living, Vincent Barrett Price with his first wife and Victoria Price with his second wife. Victoria has a really good biography of her father out. If people are looking for a good book to read about him, I recommend her book a lot. I think it's pretty fair. I mean, obviously she loves her father, but she definitely, sees his faults as well. So of course, Vincent Price, just like me, was a lifelong Democrat, and he fought racial and religious prejudice his whole life. At one point, he was on a radio show on NBC called The Saint, and at the end of an episode in 1950, he broke from the script to denounce racism and denounce Jim Crow laws on national radio, which of course at the time was huge. You know, this is 1950. This is a decade before Martin Luther King really got going. He was also appointed to the Indian Arts and Crafts Board by Dwight D. Eisenhower, which promotes artwork by Indigenous people, and he served on that until he died. He was very supportive of his daughter when she came out as a lesbian, and was highly critical and publicly critical of Anita Bryant's anti-gay campaign in the 1970s. He was also one of the founding board members of PFLAG, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, which is a huge gay rights organization for anyone who's never heard of it. And he was also one of the first celebrities to appear in PSAs about the AIDS crisis, and was one of the largest donors behind Elizabeth Taylor to AIDS research. He kind of used the last of his B-movie money to donate it to AIDS research because he really believed that was important. So that's Vincent Price.
Wow.
He was a neat dude, guys. He was so much more than and there's so much more that I could talk about, but I don't want to go on for hours. Mm-hmm. But he was so much more than just this B-movie king, of course that's what he'll always be remembered as, but he had so many positive contributions to the world. Mm-hmm. He was one of the first celebrities, along with Elizabeth Taylor, who was willing to touch people who had AIDS and touch people who had HIV on TV. Mm-hmm. And I think today, a lot of people don't realize how huge that was because so many people were afraid that you could get AIDS by touching somebody who had it, like a cold. Mm-hmm. If I coughed on you right now, you would get it, right?
Yeah.
And so it was a big deal that he and other celebrities were out there interacting, touching, hugging people who had HIV and AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's something about him being involved in the horror genre that actually was part of his personality, like as a person? You know, it just seems like, I don't know, there's like this understanding of humanity that comes with what he did, and I don't know, I could be conflating the two things, but...
No, I definitely think so. And I think that even in his schlocky B movies, you can see that come through. That even though these are not like the greatest movies ever made, right? He still manages to find the humanity in a lot of his characters. And manages to dig out motivations that maybe aren't there in the script. But he just kind of like gives them that motivation via his performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think that that's accurate. And I think that he was probably raised in pretty liberal household.
Well, he's definitely magnetic on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just, there's something about him that draws you to him.
There really is. And he, like I said, he just has that great speaking voice that really just draws you in, which is why if you can find any of his recordings of Edgar Allan Poe stories, they're great. Because he just, yeah. I mean, just the way that he infuses the stories with, like, dread is just really amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I have to look that up.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, they're really good. I think you can probably find them on YouTube. I've never looked, but I'm sure you could. So, yeah. So that's Vincent Price. I think if they had made, this is totally out of left field, but I don't care. If they had made the Marvel movies back in like the 60s or 70s, I think he would have been a great Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're right!
Right?
Oh my gosh.
Like if I could time travel right now, I would make it happen. Wouldn't he have been a great Doctor Strange? I've always thought that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And like,
you're right.
I guess I always thought Doctor Strange was supposed to be modeled on Vincent Price. Apparently that is not true. But in my mind, it was always true. So...
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I really could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to provide a couple of links on our blog to some recipes that he had, and also to, I'm sure we can find the Poe story recordings, just so you can get like a good taste of.
And I'll find the video of him poaching the fish in the dishwasher.
And that too. Fish, dishwasher.
Because it's hysterical.
I'm writing that up. Fish, dishwasher. Hopefully I'll remember what the heck that was about later. So we have chosen a couple of films. Obviously there's only 3 of us, so we can't really give you a really broad understanding of Vincent Price's work, but we've chosen a couple to just kind of pick apart. I chose House on Haunted Hill because it's one of his most famous, I think, films. And we're gonna switch gears here tone-wise, I think, because so Rachel just gave us this beautiful biography of this wonderful man, and now I'm just having to go through like the notes, because this was something, I just want you to experience this as it was happening to me and the thoughts that were going through my head as I was watching it. So I'm just going to go ahead and break down my notes a little bit and try to explain a little more when I haven't written down something that makes sense to you. So House on Haunted Hill, to put it in context, 1959, one of those classic haunted house ghost mystery whodunit intrigue stories. And the film opens with a piercing scream. And
I love this movie so much.
I'm so excited. It doesn't get much better from here. So. The narrators, or the 2 main men, are introduced as disembodied heads wearing turtlenecks, really close to the screen. One of them, who's, I'm sorry, I cannot remember hardly any of the characters' names, so I'm just going to be introducing them to you as the landlord, and Vincent Price, and Vincent Price's wife. So there's a guy who owns this house, and he's very convinced that it's haunted. Rachel, or Marina, have you seen this movie?
I think I saw it a long time ago,
Okay.
so...
correct
remember
me
parts.
if I misinterpreted some of the things that were going on here.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe there's a man who owns this house.
Mm-hmm.
And a very rich man, who is Vincent Price, has rented out this house or something.
Yes.
Because they're going to throw this awesome haunted house party.
Yes.
Now, the house is known to be haunted. And he invites a bunch of people who are not him and his wife's close friends, but they are all people who are in desperate need of money or wanting fame, and they all come up to the house like a game of Clue, and I can't keep track of the characters, and like I said, most of the people are there for money, and the ones who are there for shady reasons do not reveal the reasons for which they are there, and it's apparent right away. And I feel like I'm watching the movie I watched for the New Year's episode all over again. The credits at the beginning of the film are long and boring, and switching credits to the end of the film was a great innovation. That's just a thing. And
oh yeah,
I did not know
it's
this.
so funny to watch that.
But apparently this started with Star Wars?
It did, and that's why George Lucas quit the Producers Guild, or the Directors Guild, or one of them. He quit because he wanted to put the credits at the end of the movie, and they said no, and he was like, well, fuck you, I'm gonna quit anyway. And so, like, they wouldn't let him advertise his Star Wars, like, in certain ways and stuff, and yeah, obviously it worked out for him. But yes, that is true.
Yeah, anyway, that was an observation I made that I was glad that happened. Anyway, what I can say about this movie is that there are some awesome lines in it, and they're all delivered with the respect that the lines deserve. So, once everyone is gathered in the house, someone says, "Only the ghosts in this house are glad we're here." And they're standing there in the foyer, all awkward and not following right on the end of each other's lines, which is a pet peeve of mine as a stage manager. Like, if someone says their line before you, you gotta follow on the tail. You can't let an awkward pause happen in between it. And they've been, oh god, that beginning scene is so painful to watch. Anyway, what were you gonna say, Rachel?
One thing to remember with some of these old B movies is that they didn't have much of a budget, and because they were shooting on film, you had to keep going because it would waste film if you had to redo it. So what you pointed out, that's definitely the feature of a lot of B, not just B horror movies, but a lot of B movies for back in the day.
Oh, that's very interesting. I guess that gives me a new, like, way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's not just like you can do another take as many times as you want.
Right, because film was really expensive.
So the premise of this is that they're all going to be locked into the house after midnight, and each person, if they make it through the night, will get $10,000 from Vincent Price. And Vincent Price continues breaking the fourth wall and looking right into the camera to explain to me why he invited everyone. And I kept telling Vincent Price every time he did this that it was okay that he could address another character instead of me, because it made me feel very uncomfortable as a listener, as a viewer. And it becomes quickly apparent that Price and his wife, whose name I believe is Annabelle, obviously do not like each other. And she's talking about all his wives and how possessive and jealous he is. And he's talking about the time she tried to poison him with arsenic on the rocks. And she says, "Darling, the only ghoul in the house is you." Which, like I said, awesome lines in this movie. And I said, "Oh, I had a quick recommendation to try engaging in this witty banter with your significant other. And you basically won't have a very healthy relationship, but you'll be having sex, like, all the time." So all of these people are going to be locked in the house, like in a coffin, and they must stay there to be paid. And they keep making it clear that the ghosts, if you're seeing ghosts, they're only a product of hysteria. And they keep bringing this up like it's like 1863, but I don't know if that was still a thing then, where they thought,
Yes, it was.
They would hystericize women for seeing ghost seers are medically, there's something wrong with them.
Yes.
So someone says there are at least, and I think it's the landlord, he says there's at least 7 ghosts in the house, one for each of the occupants at the moment, which is really actually very creepy. And he says that there's been a murder almost every place in the house, and none of the murders here were just ordinary. They weren't just like someone got shot and died. It was like a guy found out his wife was cheating on him and pushed her in a vat of acid or something like that.
Wow.
And they said the only thing that came up were the bones, which is significant later. And the acid is still there in the basement for reasons that no one explains or seems to think is weird at all. Like, they're all just like, oh, that's very interesting. I don't know. And one of the women, her name is Nora, she keeps seeing ghosts in the basement, and of course the men don't believe her. They think she's hysterical, and it to me seems very obvious that someone is trying to stage this so that she seems crazy. And Price's wife seems to be trying to get to the bottom of this, and she seems to be believing the woman who is seeing the ghost, which threw me off a little bit because there's a big twist at the end of this. And she reveals that Price's other wives, 2 of them died and 1 of them disappeared. And she says he's insane with jealousy and he would kill me if he could. The woman who is seeing the ghost finds a severed head in a suitcase, and one of the house's staff tries to get her to escape, saying, you should come with me before he kills you. And it turns out the housekeeper's wife is the ghost that she's been seeing in the basement, and she's blind, so it kind of gets you as a viewer to disbelieve her a little bit. And to make things interesting, I guess, Vincent Price gives them each a little coffin with a gun in it and tells them to use it if they feel threatened throughout the night. And his wife says she doesn't need hers, so he puts it back in the coffin. Someone actually finds the severed head. I don't know why it was there. Do you even remember, Rachel?
No, I don't think there's like a reason given. It's just there.
The note is like, you won't believe there's a severed head until it happens to you, because
yes,
the woman finds it and then like everyone's like goes to see it and it's not there anymore, but then someone finds it in the closet later. So obviously it has to be a lived experience. I don't even know. It's all over the place. So then they find Price's wife, Annabelle, hanging from the banister, and she's dead. At the same time, Nora says that he put her in a room and tried to choke her. And the owner of the building is believing that his wife has joined the ghosts, that she's already kind of in cahoots with them. It's sort of a Haunting of Hill House thing where, like, if you become a ghost in the house, then you suddenly want to kill everyone who's there. And so Annabelle comes in with the rope she was hanged with to get Nora, and Nora just stands there while it slowly wraps around her ankles and screams. But it turns out, and here's the twist, Annabelle, the wife, is having an affair with one of the other guys, and her plan was to make Nora so hysterical that she would shoot Vincent Price. So she does. She gets so hysterical that she tries to shoot Vincent Price, and the guy throws his body in the vat of acid. And then it turns out that Vincent Price knows that his wife is going to try to kill him, so he fakes his own death. And what he does is he makes a plastic skeleton rise out of the vat of acid and come towards Annabelle, the wife. I got them mixed up the whole time. And pushes her into the vat of acid.
That is my favorite scene.
It's
ever.
amazing.
It is the best. There's a GIF of it on on Twitter. It's fantastic.
It's great.
And Vincent Price says, It's a pity you didn't know when you started your game of murder that I was playing too. So, oh god, some of the script is fucking amazing. And at the end of the movie, the landlord is still convinced that the house is haunted because he's saying that now there are 9. There's 2 more bodies. They'll come for me and they'll come for you. And because there were so many things in the film that were not explained, you believe that the house was actually haunted while this whole thing was going on. It's not good per se, but it has its moments.
So this is Nikki, did you know this was a William Castle movie?
Yes, and I also knew that what they did, much like the Tingler, where they put the little vibrator thing under the seats, they actually had a plastic skeleton fly over the audience during one of the screenings.
Oh my god.
And did you know that this movie inspired Psycho?
I did not know that. I didn't do a lot of research on it.
That's so funny.
Yes. I don't know why I knew that. But I did know that Alfred Hitchcock saw this movie that was made for like $0 and made a whole bunch of money at the box office. And he's like, hey, I bet I could do that too. I bet I could make this really low budget horror movie and make a bunch of money. And so on one hand, you got House on Haunted Hill. And then the other hand, you got one of the greatest movies of all time, Psycho. So yeah.
But Psycho was a lot less sensationalist than House on Haunted Hill, I think.
Oh, Psycho was hugely sensationalist when it came out.
I mean, compared to the 2 movies, even at the time, I think Psycho had a lot more... I don't know. It kind of like was a slow burn most of the way through, and then you got the shower scene, and then you got...
Well, that was...
Mrs. Bates.
Well, we'll have to do another Hitchcock episode, but that was a huge shock at the time to kill off the lead 30 minutes into the movie. And they made this big thing. Like, there was this video that Alfred Hitchcock would come on like before the movie started and tell the audience, do not spoil the twist for people who have not seen it. Yeah. No, it was a huge controversy when it came out. Such a good movie. Anyway, House on Haunted Hill. Yes, that was one of his first big hits. And you can watch it on YouTube for people who want to watch it. It's in the public domain.
Yeah.
You can watch it on YouTube.
That's where I watched it, and it was okay quality.
Yep.
I still had a question about what happened to all of his other wives.
I don't know.
Like, they never say that, like, because obviously 2 of them died and 1 of them disappeared. That wasn't an accident.
I don't know. He probably killed them. I don't know.
Then why is it so sensational that his wife wants to kill him?
I don't know. I feel like this movie was not only filmed in 5 minutes, but was probably also written in 5 minutes. So I don't know if I'd get too deep into it.
But they just made it such a needlessly complex plot and just left like it was like Swiss cheese.
Yep.
But I wasn't paying that much attention. I was just kind of letting it wash over me, so
I honestly don't know. My guess is that it's just was never written. That was just like a bit of backstory. They're like, we need some backstory for these people. Come on. But to me, I don't know if you guys have seen the remake.
Yes.
No.
So to me,
We've talked about the remake before.
So much better than the remake. I hate the remake. It is not a good movie. It is over the top in this is over the top and ridiculous in a fun way. That's over the top and ridiculous in like a taking itself way too seriously way. I hate it.
I haven't seen it in a really, really long time, but I really loved it when I was younger. So it's probably like we talked about how I loved The Wicker Man when I was a kid.
Oh my god, I forgot.
So it'll probably be one of those situations where one day I rewatch it and I'm like, oh god.
I don't know if it's as bad as The Wicker, but The Wicker Man to me is hilarious. It's like so bad that it's hysterical.
I didn't see it. I didn't even think it was funny. But again, it's been a very long time since I've seen it.
Well,
so
like the original Wicker Man is amazing with Donald Sutherland. The one with Nicolas Cage, to me, is hilarious. I mean, the bees! It's so funny. Oh my god, I'm gonna pee my pants. But
the ending of it scared me half to death.
Oh
when
my
I saw
god,
it.
you should watch the original. It's very good.
I don't even remember when The Wicker Man came out, or when House on Haunted Hill came out.
Yeah, House on Haunted Hill, the remake is not even like fun.
1999. Thought it was a
Sounds
2000s movie.
It's definitely in the vein of those like late 90s, early 2000s shitty horror movies. Like
I was 2 years old when it came out.
Well,
so
it was like late 90s, early 2000s shitty horror.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, The Haunting.
Yeah.
I know you love this movie, Miranda, but 13 Ghosts.
It's such a good movie. I still watch that movie.
But it's like they took these movies that were good the first time. I mean, The Haunting is like the original from the 60s. It's like a legitimately great movie. Mm-hmm. House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts were not legitimately great movies, but they were a lot of fun, cheesy movies. And then they just made them these like CGI, over the top, like purposefully bloody and gory spectacles with no, not for me.
Maybe, I mean, I grew up watching those like really shitty early 2000s horror movies. I mean, that's pretty much where most of my like memory of my first horror movies comes from. So maybe I'm just desensitized to how terrible they are. But there's a lot, look, I'm not alone. There are a lot of people out there who love 13 Ghosts. A lot of people who like write for different horror sites and stuff like that. So I'm not alone.
Not like Wicker Man. All right, Miranda, what did you pick?
I picked The House of Usher, which came out in 1960. Think that's a year after House on Haunted Hill, right?
Mm-hmm.
She said 59. So obviously House of Usher is based on The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which is one of my favorite short stories, as it is for a lot of people because it's so amazing. And it actually, I was surprised, it actually follows it fairly well. I mean, there are going to be some differences because The Fall of the House of Usher is a short story and this is an hour and 20-minute movie. So the main character is Philip Winthrop, and he's actually engaged to Roderick Usher's sister, Madeline. Mm-hmm. And he is going to the House of Usher to get his fiancée and take her to wherever he lives. I don't know that he ever says. At the very beginning, Usher does not want to admit him in, but the butler, I don't know his name, lets him in anyways. And once Roderick Usher meets Philip, you start to see more of the Edgar Allan Poe stuff come through in it, because in that short story, Usher is very sickly. Basically, like, you can't even really stand too close to him, otherwise he's gonna fall apart. And that's how Usher in the movie claims he is, although he doesn't appear as fragile as he says, because he's up and about, he's moving, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, he basically tells him, like, don't talk too loud, it hurts my ears, I have a disorder. And Roderick Usher is played by Vincent Price, I didn't mention that. So Philip and Usher talk about, like, how they ended up getting engaged, and Usher tells him, like, this was a mistake, it wasn't ever meant to happen, because he and his sister are dying. And he says that they suffer from a morbid acuteness of the senses, which means they have to always eat plain foods, they have to basically live in the darkness, anything that isn't, like, an incredibly soft texture just feels terrible to their skin, and everything has to be very quiet. Beyond the two of them being as sickly as they are, the house also appears to be falling apart. It is surrounded by a landscape that is just dead and barren, which is kind of similar to the short story. I mean, the outside area is really described very well in that, but I don't know if it's necessarily the same. Anyways, Philip does end up meeting with Madeline, so we know she's in the house. And he talks to her a bit, and she tells him, like, yeah, I want to go with you, I want to leave, but Usher keeps saying, no, she can't stay, or she can't leave, she has to stay here, she has to stay here. And this pretty much culminates in Usher trapping her and nearly killing her, because Philip tries to take her out of the house. He's sick and tired of Usher trying to keep her there, and he traps her down in their basement in a coffin alive. This is after Roderick explains to Philip kind of why the house is falling apart. He claims that once the house and the land around it was very healthy, but a plague of evil struck and killed the land, because his past family members were very evil people, and he goes through all of them one by one and how terrible they all were. And so he claims that they're suffering from the sins of their ancestors. So the house itself is evil, in this movie. And because Roderick does not want Madeline to leave, he, like I said, traps her in the basement and claims that it's Philip's fault that she died because him trying to take her out was too much of a strain on her heart. But of course, Philip doesn't believe that she's actually dead, and there's actually this really great scene where he is talking to Usher and trying to get him to tell him where she is, and Usher keeps telling him, no, she's dead, she's gone. And then finally he admits that she's alive, and he says, I can hear her screaming, because he has that sensitivity. And that scene is, I don't know, I felt like it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he gets her out, he finds her, and he releases her, but she tries to kill him. She's been consumed by the evil of the house. And basically, I don't know how I missed it, but somehow the house catches on fire.
I can't remember how.
Yeah, I don't know how I missed that, but the house catches on fire. Madeline ends up in a fight with Usher. Philip escapes. The house falls into the ground. And it ends with the Edgar Allan Poe quote, and the deep and dank tarn closed silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. And the end. So like I said, it's very similar to the short story that Edgar Allan Poe wrote. Basically, with that one, it's kind of like you have to decide how you see the story. It's either, did Usher trap his sister who is still alive in the coffin and she emerges and kills him, or was she dead and she emerges as a ghost and kills him? And obviously in this one, they take the case that she was buried alive and emerges to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I really loved it. I thought they did a great job with it. There were some really cool effects. There was one point where Philip has a dream, and it's this beautiful dream sequence with all of this fog and these bright colors, and there's all of the ancestors who are alive. That's a really beautiful scene. And then, do you guys remember when the Picture of Dorian Gray movie came out?
It was earlier than this.
That's what I thought. So this movie, actually, I feel like has some nods to the Picture of Dorian Gray, because the paintings in the house are very much so like the painting in that movie. If you aren't familiar with Dorian Gray, his picture becomes, no, we've talked about Picture of Dorian Gray.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about this movie. Yeah, so his picture gets like uglier and uglier the more evil of a person he becomes. And it's the same kind of artwork, almost like same style of artwork with the ancestors in the house, and also the painting of the house inside. So I thought that was really cool, because the whole idea is the house is evil itself. I thought that was really fun, and I felt like it was intentional.
So good.
If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's a great movie. And Vincent Price is amazing in it.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of like internally laughing when you were talking about how amazing of a person he is, because I was watching this movie and I was like, why is he such a good villain?
He really is, which is so funny.
He's such a great villain.
I know, he's such a good villain, but he was such a good person in real life.
Oh, that's just crazy to me.
I know, but no, it's a great movie. This is great. So this was his first Edgar Allan Poe adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
And this was actually, the movie version was written by Richard Matheson, who wrote, as we were speaking of earlier, I Am Legend.
Oh.
Yeah. Who wrote a lot of like famous horror movies that people don't realize he wrote. But yeah, I love this movie. I love it.
It really is very good.
It's very good. And I think it's a very, like you said, it's a very good adaptation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like, his take on Roderick was interesting. I think I saw him just a little bit more frail in the short story, but I don't know. I think the way that Vincent Price plays him leaves it a little bit more open to speculation. Like, are you really sick? Are you not? Like, yeah.
So good.
Now I want to, like, go watch Mask of the Red Death, because I wasn't sure which one of them I wanted to watch.
A lot of them. Pit and the Pendulum is really good, too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care for The Raven, but
okay.
There's, like, 7 or 8 of them that they did based on works of Poe. And Vincent Price is not in all of them, but he's in most of them. Okay. He's in Pit and the Pendulum, and he's in Mask of the Red Death, obviously.
Oh, and this one you have to pay for to watch. You gotta watch it on Amazon Prime.
It's on YouTube.
The one that's on YouTube isn't a Vincent Price one.
That's not the right one. You're right.
It's the one that's on there is The Fall of the House of Usher.
The earlier one.
Came out the same year, I think. Or maybe it was 1950.
You're right.
I don't remember.
That's bullshit.
Yeah, I know.
Well, it's not old enough to be in the public domain yet.
It only costs like $3, so it's not like it's gonna break the bank.
Yeah, this is a movie that's in the National Film Registry, which I always think is cool. So it's considered culturally significant.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's Vincent Price, guys.
Yay,
he's amazing. Yeah. He's so much more than just spooky movies and thriller. So I was gonna cook something for this episode from his cookbook, but obviously I'm sick. I really don't have the energy. My son is also sick. I did not have the energy to cook. But I was going to make his spaghetti alla bolognese, which I actually found the recipe online before we started. So we will post a link to the recipe on the blog. It's so good.
Do they have you make the pasta?
No, you don't have to hand make the pasta.
That's nice.
You can. You can if you want. But no. But the point of his cookbooks, much like the art, is that you too can be a gourmet chef.
Yes, it should be accessible.
Yeah, there's no reason to be afraid of gourmet cooking. You don't have to go to like Le Cordon Bleu to be a gourmet chef. You too can do it. And you can do it for not that much money. That was his other thing, is you don't have to buy these, like, super fancy ingredients. Like, why would you buy that when you can just use this instead, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I love that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so a lot of his stuff was about bringing that kind of stuff to the masses. Like, you know, that it wasn't fair that this kind of stuff was reserved for the wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, we will post the recipe for this on our blog. I've made it before. It's very good. Very, very good.
That's awesome.
Yay, Vincent.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at QOTD Podcast, on Facebook at facebook.com/QOTD Podcast, Tumblr at queensofthedamnpodcast.tumblr.com, and YouTube at Queens of the Damn Podcast.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio. You can also follow us on our blog, queensofthedamnpodcast.wordpress.com, to find bonus content and extra information on our episodes.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can find us at patreon.com/QOTD podcast, where you can receive special perks as a listener for becoming a monthly patron. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can send it to QOTDpodcast@gmail.com on PayPal. We'll see you next week.